Hello, my name is Barry Spearing, and I'm an exercise physiologist. And this presentation is all about careers in exercise science. In particular, I'm going to talk about my own professional journey working in academia, working in government, and also working in industry. Along the way, I'm going to share some of my insights in working in those different environments. I'm going to share some of my lessons learned. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to share my thoughts on the pros and cons of working in each of those sectors. And then I'm going to conclude with just some recommendations based on my experiences for how to navigate your career and also just maybe lessons learned on how to navigate life. And my hope in doing this is you'll see that I've bounced around a lot in my career. I've made a lot of moves, and I hope that you can learn from some of my stumblings, some of my mistakes, but also some of my successes, and that'll allow you to make better decisions about managing your career as you move forward in your life. So every great journey has a starting point. And for me, I grew up in a small little rural town just outside of North Plains, Oregon. And I wanted to start with this picture. This is the picture of the lumber yard that I worked in one of my summers. But the main point that I just want to get across is I grew up in a pretty rural environment. So I spent a lot of time working in agriculture, working in the woods, working in lumber mills. And in doing so, a couple of lessons. One, if you have a dream job and you feel like you're a long way away from it, that's totally okay, because I grew up in a really rural town. And as you'll see, I got the opportunity to work in some really great jobs. So everybody's got to start from somewhere, and lots of people start from humble beginnings. The second lesson that I want to share is because I grew up in a really rural environment, I didn't really know much about the career opportunities that were out there in the world. In fact, it wasn't until I was a senior in college that I learned that there was exercise science as a major. So more specifically, before I went into college, I knew I was pretty good at math. So I ended up majoring in business finance. I had some really great professors along the way. I played college football, had a great experience. And then my senior year, one of my best friends on the college football team was telling me about his major in exercise science. And I just couldn't believe that that was even an option. At the time, I was a senior, so I didn't want to start all the way over at the beginning and try to get my degree in exercise science. But I did know that that was going to be an important nugget for me. So I just kept that in my back pocket. And then once I finished my college career in sports and in football, and once I graduated, then I started looking for jobs in business finance. And I really, really struggled. In fact, I couldn't find a job in finance. So I did the last thing that any college graduate wants to do, and that's I moved back in with my parents, with my dad in particular. I worked at a golf course. I waited tables. I just was trying to make some money, looking for jobs. And then at night, when I'd get home from work, I would just kind of scour the internet looking for my dream job. And then one day, out of nowhere, I stumbled on this job posting. And it was for a research assistant, a sports science research assistant at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And that was just a huge light bulb moment for me. I knew that that's something that I wanted to pursue. So I just looked at that job description and I studied it. And the job description required a master's degree in exercise science, very specific research experiences, and also some certifications. And so I said, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get a master's. I'm going to go get some research experience. I'm going to go get some certifications, and I'm going to try to make myself eligible to get a job like this. And so with that, I started applying to grad schools. And in particular, because I didn't have an undergraduate degree in exercise science, I quickly learned that I had to go back and take some prerequisites. So I enrolled at a local community college and a local four-year institution, and at the same time took some classes at both of those places, took some anatomy and physiology, took some exercise physiology, a kinesiology course. And then once I had those prereqs, I studied for my GREs, took that test, and then I really got serious about applying to programs. And I found one program in particular called Ithaca College in upstate New York. Not only was it a great school in terms of a master's program in exercise science, but they also offered me a graduate assistantship. And so for those of you that aren't aware of what a graduate assistantship is, some schools, in exchange for you either teaching or doing research or doing some sort of professional service for them, they will pay for all your classes and sometimes give you a small stipend or small amount of money. And for me, I had zero experience in exercise science, but I did have experience playing college football. And Ithaca had an opening for a graduate assistantship to help coach the football team. So long story short, not only did I get accepted into Ithaca College, but they also offered me a graduate assistantship to help coach the college football team. So I packed up my 1992 Ford Escort with all my earthly belongings, and I took a road trip from a small town in Oregon all the way across the country to Ithaca, New York. And that is when I started my master's program at Ithaca College. I had a fantastic experience. I studied and worked very hard, going to classes at nights, and then or during the days, and at nights, in the evenings, I coached practices and games for the college football team. And outstanding experience coaching. I learned along the way that maybe being a college football coach wasn't going to be the career path that I wanted to pursue. But at the time I thought, well, maybe I want to get into coaching, but as a strength and conditioning coach. So physically training athletes. And at about that time, I had a conversation with the head football coach at Ithaca College, and I mentioned that I was interested in being a strength and conditioning coach. And he said, hey, I don't know if you know this, but the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the New Orleans Saints used to play football at Ithaca. So you maybe should get in touch with him. And so this was back in the year 2000. So I actually hand wrote a letter and mailed it to him. And a couple of days later, I got a phone call from the assistant strength and conditioning coach. And he said, hey, Barry, I got your letter. I got your resume. We would love to have you as an intern. You've got some really great experiences, but we just don't do internships with the Saints. And I said, hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate you even considering me. I wish you nothing but the best, and hopefully our paths will cross someday. And then just out of pure luck, a couple of weeks later, I was talking to my football coach at Linfield College in Oregon, where I played. And I had mentioned this story with the assistant strength coach for the Saints. And he said, hey, Barry, I don't know if you know this, but the general manager of the New Orleans Saints actually used to play quarterback at Linfield. And so maybe you should try getting in touch with him. So I wrote him a letter, included my resume, and I essentially said, hey, I talked to your assistant strength coach. I know that you don't do internships, but if something ever changed, I would love to be considered for an internship in the strength and conditioning department. And then a couple of days later, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from the assistant strength coach, and he said, hey, Barry, it turns out that now we do internships. And so I'd like to offer you an opportunity to join us for camp with the New Orleans Saints. So apparently my networking and my persistence paid off because I landed that internship with the New Orleans Saints. So I packed up my bags and I flew down to New Orleans, and I joined the Saints for their preseason camp as a strength and conditioning intern. Here's a few pictures from my experience. So the picture on the right is a picture from practice. And as you can see in the red circle, that's me. So how the job worked was when they were at practices, the strength and conditioning coaches were there to help with the preparations, to help people stay hydrated, to help look after the players. And then every other day, there would also be a session specifically designated to strength and conditioning. And that's when I'd help the athletes, administer the training program, the weightlifting program, the conditioning program. And then occasionally when the athletes had questions about supplements or whatever, we would offer our perspectives. And then also the newspaper clipping on the left, while I was with the Saints, there was a tropical storm that came through town that caused us to have to reschedule practice a little bit. And as luck would have it, the meteorologists ended up naming it Tropical Storm Barry. And so the newspaper clipping I just thought was hilarious. And I cut it out and I sent it to my youngest brother and told him that the Saints were trying to recruit me to play on their team. I don't think he believed me, but I still thought it was pretty funny nonetheless. At that time, my internship was winding down. I had a fantastic experience. I loved working with athletes. I wasn't sure if being a strength and conditioning coach was something that I wanted to do the rest of my life. And then it dawned on me, hey, that wasn't the original dream. The original dream was to be a sports scientist at the Olympic Training Center. And so I kind of went back to that a little bit and was giving it some thought. I was talking to one of my old advisors from Ithaca College, and she said, hey, Barry, I don't know if you know this, but there's another Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid, New York, which is just a few hours from here. And I actually know the sports scientist up there, the senior physiologist, and they do internships, and they have their application is right online. You can get that. And so I went online, found the application, filled it out. I got a letter of recommendation from my advisor at Ithaca College, and lo and behold, I ended up getting a sports science internship. So I packed my bags again, flew back to Ithaca, and then road tripped up to Lake Placid, New York to start my internship. So internship number 2 was my dream position as a sports science intern at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid, New York, working with a lot of winter sport athletes. So we worked with bobsled, women's ice hockey, cross-country skiing. We also did some work with rhythmic gymnastics and some other summertime sports as well. Had a great time. So it was collecting data on athletes, and all of a sudden it just dawned on me how much I loved being a sports scientist. And that's once through that internship, I just really, it cemented with me that being a sports scientist was something that I loved. I loved working with athletes, collecting data, analyzing data, writing reports, giving the information back to the athletes. And sometimes we even got to publish or present our information. And I love that too. So I just knew that being a sports scientist was a career that I wanted to do. At the same time, I need to call out one special character. So there was the senior scientist, there was the lab manager, and the lab manager was a guy named Dan Jettleson. And the reason I want to mention his name is because his name is going to pop up several times over my career journey. But another reason why I want to mention that name is because that was in 2002. So the Winter Olympics were in Salt Lake City. The freestyle aerialists, which is a form of skiing, asked Dan if he would go with them to Salt Lake City and support their efforts to win a medal. And so Dan, of course, went, which meant that they needed more help at the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid. So my manager, the senior scientist, asked me if I'd be willing to stick around for a little while longer. And they essentially ended up extending my position for a full year. Great experience, again, cementing that I love sports science. After Dan gets back, then a couple of things change. One is Dan decides he's going to go get his PhD at the University of Connecticut, working with Carl Marish. And my senior scientist, my senior physiologist, Dr. Ken Rendell, he ends up taking a position to start up a brand new lab at Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he turns to me and said, hey, Barry, I know you're on this temporary position, but I would love if you would join me at Marywood University. You can manage the lab. It'd be a full-time job. I think it'd be a really great opportunity for you. And of course, I said yes. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up on. So once again, I packed up that same 1992 Ford Escort and I road tripped down to Scranton, Pennsylvania to start my first real job. So my first real job was at Marywood University in their brand new human performance laboratory. As I mentioned, Dr. Rendell was the lab director, and we did a lot of sports science related research, but probably the biggest research or the most common research that we did was a lot of exercise-induced asthma research. So cold weather athletes breathing in all that cold, dry air can aggravate your lung tissue or your airways, causing you to get bronchoconstriction or asthma. And that's a big problem if you want to be competitive. So we did a lot of research on how do you diagnose asthma, how do you treat asthma, what's the effect of medication on the asthma, and also what's the effect of medication on your performance. Long story short, it was a fantastic job for me. Again, I enjoyed sports science. I also learned that if I wanted to pursue my own interests, and my own interests were more in just human performance, and particularly at the time, strength and conditioning and resistance exercise, if I wanted to pursue my own career and my own interests, then I'd have to go back and get a PhD. And so I started doing my research, and what I found was one of the best people in the world doing resistance exercise physiology was a professor named Bill Kramer, who was at University of Connecticut. And as you might remember, Dan Jettleson was already at the University of Connecticut working with Dr. Marish. And so I talked to Dan, I mentioned this, and he said, hey, I have a class with Dr. Kramer. I take one of his classes. I'll ask him if he's looking for more PhD students. Long story short, Dr. Kramer said he was, and so I put together my application, all my research publications, all my experiences, sent him my application, and I ended up getting an interview with him. And at that point, it dawned on me that not only do like my senior scientists look out for me, so Dr. Rendell looked out for me and helping me get a job, but my peers, Dan Jettleson, was responsible for helping me get a position, a professional position, a graduate assistantship at the University of Connecticut, just reinforcing the idea that job opportunities can come from anywhere. So long story short, I still had the same 1992 Ford Escort, packed up my earthly belongings, and moved to Storrs, Connecticut. And this is a picture of the faculty and graduate students at UConn at the time I was there. I had, again, a fantastic 4 years there. A couple of key insights. One is probably the biggest study that was funded in our lab while I was there was funded by the Army, in particular, the Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, or USAREM. And they had a really important question about how do you help women train up for basic combat training without getting a stress fracture? So how do you improve their performance and reduce their likelihood of getting an injury? So they funded a big study in Dr. Kramer's lab. And so not only did I get experience running studies on my own, or mostly on my own with, of course, a lot of supervision along the way, but I learned a lot about bone physiology. I got some more publications and presentations. And just as importantly, I was working side by side with a lot of the researchers from the Army. And that's an important fact that's going to play out a little further down the road. So then the study with the Army ends. I start working on my dissertation. Before I do that, I just want to call out a couple of people. One is, that's me. That's Dan Jettleson, and you've heard his name several times, and you're going to hear a few more times down the road. That's my advisor, Dr. Kramer, who was very instrumental in shaping me as a scientist and also helping me get job opportunities down the road. And then that's Dr. Doug Casa. I mention him because I don't think I ever took a class from Dr. Casa, and he wasn't on my dissertation committee, but every time he needed help with something, I always jumped in to help out. So I helped collect data for his studies. I volunteered to be a research participant in his studies. I was just always hanging out with him, learning him, helping him out as much as I can. He was super helpful and grateful to me. But the key point that I want to make is, as you'll see down the road in my story, he was a big part in getting a job opportunity for me. I never took a class from him. You would never I never would have imagined in a million years that he would be so instrumental in my career. But it just, once again, goes to prove that you never know how or when job opportunities, or from who job opportunities are going to come from. So back to the story. I finished up the Army study looking at bone health in women. I started my dissertation looking at muscle cell signaling responses to resistance exercise. And then as I was finishing up my dissertation, it was time to start looking for, what is my life going to look like after I graduate? What's my career going to be? And right at about that time, Dr. Kramer, who's internationally renowned for his research and who also serves on panels for NASA, NASA called him up one day and said, "Hey, Dr. Kramer, we're looking for a new exercise physiologist, someone who knows about muscles and physical training and bone health. Do you know of anybody?" And he was like, "Actually, I have a student who just finished a project looking at muscle cell signaling. He also worked on a project with the Army looking at bone health. It was a training study. He's got experience in all these areas. You should consider him." So I ended up finding the job posting. I put in my application, and lo and behold, I ended up getting the job working at Johnson Space Center doing research. So back to the map. This time was a professional job, so I didn't have to road trip to NASA. They ended up shipping my car for me, so I flew down to Houston, Texas, and started my job working at Johnson Space Center. So as you can imagine, it was a huge, huge honor to work at Johnson Space Center. I loved the astronauts are some of the most amazing people that I've met. Also, my coworkers were fantastic and very sharp. So it was fun doing a lot of research on bone health, developing new exercise devices that could go up into space, looking at new ways to measure muscle and bone function, muscle and nerve function before and after spaceflight. So I got a lot of great research experience. Also, at the time, occasionally we were sending astronauts back and forth from the space station through the Russian Soyuz rocket. So on a couple of occasions, astronauts were coming back, but instead of coming back to Florida, they came back to Russia. So I got to go to Russia a couple of times and test astronauts as soon as they landed and got back from space. So that picture on the right is a picture of me in Red Square in Moscow. So again, just a fantastic experience. Met some great people, got to travel internationally, got to serve astronauts, all great experiences. After about a couple of years, I just really started missing my family on the West Coast. And at about the same time, my dear friend Dan Judelson and I were talking on the phone, and he said, "Hey, Barry, I don't know if you know this, but we're going to have a faculty opening for an assistant professor, someone who specifically focuses on strength and conditioning." So essentially exactly what I do. It's back in California. It's living with my friends. It's closer to home. So I made the tough decision to leave NASA, but the exciting decision to go to Cal State Fullerton. So back to the map, I packed up my bags. Two of my brothers joined me this time. We took a road trip all the way out west, made a quick side detour up to Las Vegas for a couple of fun nights, and then ended up at Cal State Fullerton as an assistant professor. So I'll tell you a little bit about this position. So first of all, as I'm sure all your professors can tell you, being a college professor is probably one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. It's just really a great and rewarding experience to be able to develop students, to not only teach them, but to show them how to conduct their own research, to do self-directed learning, and then to help them be successful in their own careers. So professionally, it was very rewarding. Also on a personal level, I was living with my best friend and his wife, and they also had a 3-month-old baby at the time. So I was the nanny of the household. So personally, it was a great experience. I was also living closer to family. Everything was going fantastic. And then about a year and a half into it, out of the blue, I got a phone call from the Army, from the Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. As you might remember, when I was at UConn, they were funding a lot of our research. And the person was Dr. Brad Nindle from USAREUM. And he said, "Hey, Barry, we're looking for somebody who focuses in human performance, someone that can improve soldier performance and reduce the likelihood of soldiers getting injured. I remember your experiences at UConn. I think you'd be a great fit, and I hope you'll consider applying." And I remember, I was giving it some thought, and I was talking to Dr. Kramer, and he said, "Hey, it never hurts to apply." And so I was like, that's a great point. Like, I'm going to apply and just see if this is the right fit for me and if it's the right fit for USAREUM. I flew out there for an interview and was absolutely blown away by the mission, so protecting soldier health and performance, the facilities, the opportunities. And at the time, my youngest brother was an Army Ranger, so it just felt like the most meaningful, the best decision for me. So even though I loved being at Cal State Fullerton and being a professor, I decided to take a risk. And so I, again, packed up my belongings and flew out to Natick, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, and started working at the Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, or USAREUM. Picture on the left is me wearing one of the soldiers' backpacks. So soldiers carrying heavy loads, also known as load carriage or backpacking or ruck marching, that's an important part of their performance, but it's also an important part of injury risk. As you can imagine, carrying heavy loads puts you at risk for getting muscle and bone injuries. So we just did a lot of research on how to improve performance and reduce the risk of injury. The picture on the right is also a good story. A few months into the job, the Massachusetts Firefighting Academy called my division chief, Dr. Ed Zembrowski, and said, a lot of our firefighters are having problems with rhabdomyolysis. So they're firefighting recruits. So as they transition from being a civilian to a firefighter, they got to go through a training period, and they were getting this thing called rhabdomyolysis, which if you don't know what that means if you train too intensely, too much, when you're not quite prepared physically, then you can get a lot of muscle damage. And that what happens is that muscle damage causes proteins inside the muscle to leak into the blood, which can eventually, if it's serious enough, can cause kidney damage, or in a worst case, or in a bad case, amputation, or in the worst case, even death. So it's a serious condition. And so Dr. Zembrowski and I went to the Massachusetts Firefighting Academy. We observed the activities, we conducted some interviews, and then we went back, we discussed it, we made some recommendations and a plan of attack for the Firefighting Academy to reduce the chances of rhabdomyolysis. And then several months go by and they call us up and they say, hey, Dr. Zembrowski and Barry, we've had 0 cases of rhabdomyolysis since you guys made your recommendations. And as thank you, we'd like to invite Barry out and kind of go through some of the drills with us. So as a thank you gift, they put me in a firefighter suit and threw me inside of a burning building, which was probably one of the best thank you gifts I ever got. It was just such a cool experience for me. So again, that picture on the right, that's actually me. Let me take a step back. 2 years at the Army, fantastic experience. And I can tell you, I enjoyed every day working for the Army. Very meaningful for me. Like I said, my brother was a soldier. I enjoyed improving health and improving performance. So everything was great. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from Nike. And Nike's headquarters is in Beaverton, Oregon, which is like 20 minutes from where I grew up. And your next question is, why did Nike call you up? Well, at first, Nike didn't call me. Nike called Doug Casa, so the professor at the University of Connecticut, and they were asking him if he knew of anyone that might be a good fit for that position. And he was like, wait a minute, performance, Oregon, Barry. Like, I know the perfect guy. You should call up Barry. So Nike called me up, told me about the position, asked me if I was interested in applying. I did apply. I flew out there for the interview, was blown away by the opportunities and also the opportunity to live close to my family. And so I loved the Army. It was 2 of the best years of my life, but I just really felt compelled to work at Nike and to be close to family. Like, it was just a perfect match for me. Side note, between the time that I said yes and the time that I actually started, in that time in between, Nike also interviewed and hired Dan Judelson for a position. So not only would I be moving home to Oregon and working for an awesome company, but I'll be working with Dan Judelson again. So this time I'm packing up my bags, and I'm finally, after 13 years, moving home to Oregon. So picture on the right is me collecting data. We looked at all sorts of things. So how does apparel affect temperature regulation? How does apparel like compression garments affect recovery? How does shoes affect the energy required to run? All of those things. And then the picture on the left is actually me at a media event. So sometimes if Nike has a great new innovative product, they'll put on a media event, they'll showcase their product. And in this particular example, they also wanted to showcase some of the scientists who do research to help with their innovations. So I got the opportunity to go to New York City to a media event to talk about temperature regulation and products and science. Had a great time. After 2 years of Nike, I was honored to get a promotion. Matt Nurse, who was a great manager for me, gave me an opportunity to be the director of apparel research. I jumped right at the opportunity. It turned out that I loved managing, which I was a little nervous at first, but I actually really enjoyed it. So life was really good. So 4 years into the job at Nike, I had been promoted. I was living close to home. I was mentoring junior scientists. I was really having the time of my life. And then sadly, my mom got terminal cancer. So for a while, for several months, I just took care of my mom at night while working during the day. And after several months of doing that, I just really, not only did I burn myself out in a bad way, but also my mom's condition got much worse. And it just got to a point that I just physically and mentally could not work anymore. And so I left my job at Nike. It was a gut-wrenching decision, but it was the right decision to focus not only on my mom, but to focus on myself. To be honest, my mental health was really not good at the time, and I was completely burnt out in every way that you can imagine. So I had to take care of myself, and I had to take care of my family first. So I left, and it was tough. And so several months down the road, my mom sadly passes away. And then for in total, about 1.5 years, I was unemployed. So my hope was to go back to Nike. So I met up with Matt once I was ready to get back into work. And it turned out that this was part of an economic downturn. And sadly, Nike was going to have to lay off about 10% of its workforce. So it wasn't going to work for me to go back to Nike. So then I looked for other exercise science jobs in the Portland area. And maybe just another lesson is for some professions, you can find a job in any city across the country. If you're working in healthcare or working in finance or accounting or those types of professions, there's jobs in every city in the world or in the country. But in exercise science, sometimes you just have to go where the jobs are at. And I tried looking outside of exercise science to see if I could do, just anything in the Portland area, and I could not find a job. And so after about 1.5 years, I was talking to my old manager with the Army, Marilyn Sharp, and she said, "Hey Barry, if you're still looking for a job, we would love to have you back." And I had such a great experience at Usarium, so many great friends there. The mission was fantastic. Marilyn was a great mentor to me, and so it was the right decision. I did not want to leave my family, but I needed to get back to work and get my life back in order. So I made the gut-wrenching decision to pack up my bags. This time I had upgraded, so now I was driving a Jeep. The 1992 Ford Escort was not making it anymore. So I road tripped across the country back to Boston. And so now I'm back living in Boston, back working for the Army for Usarium. This picture in particular was another one of the highlights of my professional experience while I was at ARIUM. So the Army was concerned about maintaining soldier health and performance when they had to do really difficult missions in Arctic environments. So they sent a group of scientists to the Arctic Circle, specifically up in Norway. And so I got to go to Norway, collect blood, collect urine, collect fecal matter, so looking at microbiome, the gut microbiome. So we got to collect pretty much everything, looking at soldier health and performance in the cold. And it was just such a great experience, fantastic opportunity. So once again, I was there for 4 years. The first time I worked for the Army, I was a civilian, a federal government employee, which meant I was on a semi-permanent contract. But this time when the Army hired me, I was on a contract that had a max of 5 years. And so after 4 years, I was trying to figure out, what was next. So I wasn't sure if it was going to work out for me to stay long-term with the Army. And at about that same time, I got a message out of the blue on LinkedIn from Trampus Tenbrook at the New Balance Sport Research Lab and said, "Hey, Barry, we're looking for a physiologist. You already have all that experience with Nike. You're already living in Boston, so you wouldn't have to move. Are you interested in applying?" So I put in my application. A conversation turned into an interview, and an interview turned into a job offer, and the timing was right. So this time I didn't even have to pack my bags or move or do anything. And in fact, my commute actually got shorter. And I gladly and happily found myself at the New Balance Sport Research Lab. So this is another just fantastic place to work. This is where I currently work. Fantastic culture. Everybody that I've met at New Balance is exceptionally friendly. Also very innovative. So we do some really great research projects trying to make better footwear, make better apparel, and also fantastic facilities. So as you can see, this is a picture of a couple of our biomechanists at Mission Control. You can see just in front of them, the brown floor, that's a basketball court. Just in front of that, or beyond that, is a blue surface, that's a tennis court. To the right, you can just barely see some green. Well, that's some turf. And to the left, you can't really see it all, but there's a strip of track. In each of those surfaces, we have force plates embedded into the ground. And then also, if you look up in the rafters, you can kind of make out some 3D motion capture cameras. So essentially, we can study how footwear affects your body, how footwear affects propulsion or braking forces, or you name it. But we also, in the background that you can't see, we have an environmental chamber. We can make it hot, we can make it cold, we can make it humid, we can make it high altitude. But we use that as a way to test apparel. So how do you make apparel that keeps you comfortable regardless of the weather? Well, if you're trying to do that research outside, some days it'll be warm, some days it'll be cold. It's hard to make any conclusions. But if you can do it inside an environmental chamber where the conditions are consistent every day, then you can do some really great research on apparel. So that's where I'm at now. Fantastic experience. Again, people are great, facilities are great, and the work culture is innovative and friendly. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of working in academia versus government versus industry. So I'll start with academia. So what are the pros? Well, first of all, I think one of the pros is you get to pursue your own interests. So for me, I was interested in human performance. I could pursue that all the way. For some people, it's looking at how exercise affects diseases like diabetes or heart disease. For other people, it's looking at bones, or you name it. If you're interested in it, you can pursue it. You can do whatever you want. It's kind of like being the CEO of your own business, in that you get to pursue your own interests, but you also got to find somebody to fund it or to pay for it along the way. So that's just something to think about. Another pro is you get to impact the lives of students. Not only are you teaching them in the classroom, but you're also teaching them in the laboratory and showing them how to pursue their own interests and answer their own questions. And then as they graduate, you get to help them with their career along the way. So it's just very rewarding to help impact the lives of students. And then lastly, autonomy. So college professors get a lot of autonomy in how they structure their days, when they're at work, when they're at home, what classes do they teach, what do they research, what committees do they serve on. You just get a lot of autonomy, and that's a really good thing when you're a faculty member. Some of the cons, and cons is a strong word, but maybe just things to think about. I would say in my experience, the first few years, or maybe even more, can be very, very challenging. So when you first start off as a new faculty member, you're creating entire courses. So you're not just given one lecture, but you got to give lectures that build on each other back to back in a sequential way that students can learn from. And that takes a lot of planning and a lot of thought. You also have to establish your own lab. So you have to buy equipment, get facilities involved. There's a lot of work in that. And then you're performing professional service activities like serving on committees or different conferences. And then lastly, getting funding. So if you want to pursue your own interests, you got to find somebody to pay for it. Sometimes the university will help provide some funding, but sometimes, like if your goal is to rid the world of type 2 diabetes via exercise, then you got to write a grant to the National Institutes of Health or whoever to fund your research. Next, let's talk a little bit about government. So the pros are it's usually stable employment. So stable meaning when you have a job, usually the funding for your position is pretty consistent, but also stable in that you know what you'll be working on for the most part from one year to the next. But I use the word usually because it's not always. So just so you know, some people have a misconception that if you get a government job, you're set for life. Well, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes funding gets cut, and so contracts can't get renewed. And so sadly, people can lose their job. And also, if you're not performing up to standard, I'm aware of people that have lost their job due to performance reasons as well. So it's usually stable employment, but there can be things within your control or totally outside your control, like funding and budgets, that can cause that stability to go away at times. It's also usually a compelling mission. So when you're working for the government, you're doing work that benefits the public. And for me, that was awesome. So specifically when I was at NASA, I got to support astronauts and help them with their health and performance. And when I was with the Army, I was doing research for soldier health and performance. My brother was an Army Ranger. So it was just a really compelling mission for me. And then lastly, I put sometimes you get some really unique opportunities. So for me, I got to go to the Arctic Circle in Norway. I got to go to Russia to test astronauts. Those are unique opportunities that not everybody in the world are going to get. And I only got those opportunities because I was working for the government. So that was just a fantastic side benefit of the job. The cons are, I would say bureaucracy exists for a good reason, but can be quite burdensome. So what do I mean by that? So in the US, we want to make sure our government isn't corrupt. So if you want to buy something, you can't go talk to somebody you know and just buy it straight from a buddy, because that would be corrupt. The people that you know are benefiting from you being in a government position. And instead, if you want to buy an item, you need to define exactly what that item has to be able to do. And then you need to put out a request for proposals. And that way, everybody that makes that device has the opportunity to bid. And then based on price and function and everything else, then you can finally go about acquiring that equipment. So another way of saying that is if you want to buy a piece of lab equipment and you work in academia or industry, as long as you have the money, you can kind of go ahead and buy it. But if you work in the government, it might take months or maybe even up to a year before you actually get that thing in-house, because you have to go through all of those steps. And again, that bureaucracy, I think, exists for a good reason, because you don't want corruption, but the bureaucracy can be quite burdensome. So if you're somebody that gets easily frustrated by bureaucracy, then you should give that some thought before you make a decision on working for the government. And then lastly, let's talk about industry. The pros, for me at least, is you got the opportunity to work and learn about a bunch of diverse different areas, and sometimes those are non-scientific. So in other words, when I worked at Nike and at New Balance now, you got to learn about budgets. You got to learn about the legal implications of your research. You got to learn about how to make the product and manufacture the product and design the product and engineering, product integrity. You got to learn about a lot of different things. And for me, that was really exciting. And then another side effect of that is because you're working with people that have completely different backgrounds than you need to be able to speak in a way that everyone can understand. So you can't rely on scientific jargon. You have to use very clear and direct words to describe what you're trying to accomplish. And at the same time, they need to describe their profession in a way that's clear and understandable, because you might not know the jargon associated with tax codes or other legal terminology, for example. So everybody has to be able to communicate with everybody else. So for me, that's a lot of fun. Another pro is that it's really fast paced. So if I have an idea for a study, there's nothing stopping me from collecting data that same day. Like, as long as we have the equipment in place and a couple of available subjects, we can go. So things can move pretty quickly in industry, which for me, I really like the fast pace. And then lastly, entrepreneurial. So when you're in like the academic world, you can do good science for science sake, meaning if you want to understand why blood pressure changes in response to a certain type of exercise, you can go do that research. But when you're in industry, you need to think about how the research is going to affect the entire organization. How is it going to affect their ability to meet their mission, to make products, to make a profit, or whatever. But you just need to think about all the ways in which your research is going to affect the organization. So you need to think like you own the business. So for me, I just really like that entrepreneurial side. So for me, that's a pro. And then the cons, I would say organizational changes can come quickly. And that can be like a reorganization. So I've been through scenarios where people have had one boss one day and then they show up to work and they have a completely different boss the next day, or manager. Also, they've been working on a project for 6 months and now that project is not a priority anymore. So now they have a new set of projects. And then sadly, sometimes reorganizations also lead to people losing their jobs through no fault of their own. So organizational changes can come quickly. And I'd say that holds true particularly for the really big companies, and then also for the really small startup companies. In my experience, working at a medium-sized company at New Balance, it seems like there's just a little bit more stability, so that can be a good thing. And then the last thing is just some final thoughts on how to navigate your life. And these are just things from my experience. So these are my tips. So just take them with a grain of salt. These are just my experiences. So the first tip is to find your dream and don't get distracted from your dream. So for me, I was scouring the internet while I was working on a golf course and waiting tables, and I found a job description working as a sports scientist at the Olympic Training Center, and I knew that was my dream. But you also saw that I got distracted. I ended up coaching. I ended up being a strength and conditioning coach. Those were ultimately, they were great experiences, and I'm glad I did them, but I needed to get myself reorientated to the dream. And that brings me to point number 2, and that is, when you don't have a dream, try as many things as possible until you start to find what your dream is. And in particular, learning what you like and learning what you don't like is very important, especially early in your career. Sometimes you don't know if you're going to like something or not like something until you actually try it. Some things could sound great on paper, but when you try it, it's not as fun. So for me, I thought I wanted to be a sports scientist, and then I actually did it, and I learned that I loved it. But for other people, if they don't like looking at numbers or running statistical analyses or writing reports or presentations, then maybe being a sports scientist isn't for them. And they should go find like a a different job that's more like people orientated, or in healthcare, or like any other job. But the point being is, you're not going to know if you like or don't like something until you try it. So just be willing to try a bunch of different things. The other thing I'll say is, you need to share your dreams with others, because you'll need their help. So once you find that dream job, I never would have got the internship with the Saints or the internship with the Olympic Training Center had I not talked to my professors and advisors. They're the ones that helped me meet the right people and find the right applications. So I would not be anywhere without sharing my dreams with others and receiving help from others. The next thing I'll say is networking and persistence. So you'll be told no many times before you're told yes. So in my example, the Saints told me no before eventually my networking and my persistence led to a different opportunity, and eventually they called me back and they said yes. So you just need to be prepared to talk to a lot of people, to be persistent in the face of no's. On that note, on networking, everybody has a little bit of a different definition for networking. But for me, I think a lot of times I was networking, but I didn't even realize I was doing it. So for me, I just want to get involved. I want to learn. I want to see what other people are doing. So I was helping them out with their projects, volunteering to be in their studies. And it just turned out that that's kind of like networking. Like if you're just helping people out and meeting people and trying new things and being of service, then you're also building your network and your reputation at the same time. So my example was with Gasa. I just wanted to volunteer and help him out with his studies and be in his studies. And it turned out years down the road, he remembered me and I got a job opportunity because of him. I'd also say, when possible, plan your future while simultaneously being open to other paths. So for me, again, I found that job description to be a research assistant with the Olympic Training Center. So I knew that I had to plan to get a master's, to get some research experience, to get some certifications. I did that, and I was able to plan for my future and eventually achieve that goal. But at the same time, as you can see, a lot of my life has just been being open to different opportunities and new ways. So I would just encourage you to be open. Also, maybe my best piece of advice out of all of these is to strive to be the best version of yourself at all times, because you never know who's watching. And also, you never know where job opportunities are going to come from. So it could be from professors, but it could also be from fellow students. So for me, Dan Judelson was a great example. It could be managers like Dr. Rendell, but it could also be former managers like Marilyn Sharp, people that you used to work with. It could be coaches. For me, it was coaches at Linfield and at Ithaca, and it could also be perfect strangers. So my job at New Balance was because Trampus contacted me just out of the blue from LinkedIn. So you never know where or from whom a job opportunity is going to come from. So just always try to be the best version of yourself. And that's not to say you can't have a bad day. We all have bad days. Trust me, I have plenty of them. But even when you're having a bad day, just treat yourself with respect and dignity, and treat others with respect and dignity, no matter what, if it's a bad day or a good day, because people are genuinely and generally paying attention. The other thing I'll say is to get involved. So get involved with your professors, your managers, get involved with organizations, American College of Sports Medicine, the National Strength and Conditioning Association. There's tons of great organizations. Get involved in research and publishing and presenting. You never know. One time I published a paper, I posted it on LinkedIn, and a couple of days later, a company contacted me about interviewing for a position. I never would have known about that position had I not posted something on LinkedIn that I published. It turned out that they ended up, I applied, I interviewed, and they offered the job to somebody else, and that's okay. In this presentation, I've only really talked about the jobs that I got, but I will tell you there's been just as many and definitely more jobs that I didn't get. So everybody's going to be told no and not get jobs from time to time. So don't let my successes fool you. I've definitely had some misses along the way. The next thing I'll say is you will face adversity, both personally and professionally. I can't tell you how that adversity is going to manifest for you or when it's going to manifest, but you will face adversity. So for me personally, it was when my mom got terminal cancer. That was just devastating to me, mentally and emotionally, but also it had a lot of professional repercussions. I just couldn't work anymore. I ended up being unemployed for a year and a half. And that was the most difficult year and a half of my life. So you're going to face adversity, but I can tell you that I got through it and I'm a better person now, I think, than I was before. And I can also tell you that you're going to get through it. And if you get help and seek counseling and talk to people and make your way through it, then you're probably going to be a better person at the end and a little bit more grateful and humble. Like I said, for me, being unemployed for a year and a half, that was a humbling experience. And also, I was very grateful to have a job finally at the end of that when the Army hired me back. Create and maintain a presence on LinkedIn. So this is the ironic part where I encourage some social media use. So if you don't have a profile on LinkedIn, make one today. And then also maintain your presence. So every time you have a little win, a victory, you get a certificate, you finish your degree, you publish a paper, you have a presentation, you name it. But I would post about it. Just let people know that you're doing good things. It's not bragging. It's just letting them know that you're accomplishing good things. And then you never know if a job opportunity is going to come because of it. But you're going to find lots of job opportunities through LinkedIn. I'd also say I'd encourage you, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me. Sometimes I see about job postings and I'll try to like them and repost them. And so if we're connected, then you might see more opportunities. And then the last thing I'll say is just enjoy the journey, even when things are very different than you imagine. So as I was growing up in a small town in Oregon, I never would have imagined my life would have worked out this way. But I can also say, in some ways, my life has turned out even better than I would have imagined. So what I'm thinking is your life too is probably going to turn out pretty different than what you'd imagine. But if you just enjoy the journey and each unique opportunities that comes with all the challenges that you're going to face along the way, then I think you're going to be a happier person. So that's it. That's my presentation on careers in exercise science. I hope you found it useful. Again, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. If I can help along the way, just let me know. So thanks for your time and take care.